My talk, you could say, is a little less ambitious, perhaps, than almost everyone that I've heard so far. And it's just looking at types of matters that Stoics describe as beautiful. And obviously, if we wanted to be comprehensive in this, we'd need like a whole seminar because they say so many things about beauty and so many things are beautiful. So we're just going to look at a selection of examples drawn from the three Stoic thinkers that I think almost everybody is the most familiar with, which would be Seneca and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. And we're looking at examples that are coming directly from their text. I've put them into kind of an order, and hopefully it's one that has a good flow and makes sense for people. So we're doing a little bit of an itinerary here. And I'll just note very briefly, several times terminology has come up. Almost all of the examples that we're looking at in Epictetus's and Marcus Aurelius's Greek are using the word kalon. There's a few where that's not the case. And then Seneca's tend to be pulcher, beauty, beautiful, and so these are the things that we're going to be looking at. And the general plan is to begin with some common instances and features of beautiful things, and then widen our scope as far as it can possibly go to the entire cosmos itself, and then descend through us human beings and get down to really humble and seemingly unbeautiful things and think about what the Stoics have to tell us about them. And, what we can do at the end is think about how we can have good or bad or wise or foolish responses to beauty, something that we've already had a lot of discussion of already, including in the last presentation. And we can call out some guidelines, which again, I think is something we've been hearing about a good bit already, about how we can properly and positively appreciate beautiful items without getting sucked into, let's call it, the seductive side of, I won't say bad beauty, but, more problematic instances. So there's two passages I'd really like to start with. And one of these is from Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, Book 4. He says, beautiful things of any kind are beautiful in themselves and sufficient to themselves. Praise is extraneous. The object of praise remains what it was, no better, no worse. This applies, I think, even to beautiful things in ordinary life, physical objects, artworks. Does anything genuinely beautiful need supplementing? No more than justice does, or truth, or kindness, or humility. Are any of those improved by being praised or damaged by contempt? Is an emerald suddenly flawed if no one admires it, or gold, or ivory, or purple, lyres, knives, flowers, bushes? And so what we've got here are references to beautiful things in what he calls ordinary, or we could say even common life, koinoteron, the most common sorts of things that we're all accustomed to calling beautiful. And so, he talks about emeralds and other precious things. Now, that's changed culturally over time. Not too many of us are walking around with gold or emeralds or anything like that. And we can reproduce some of these things by industrial processes. So perhaps their value has come down a bit, but, fine works of craftsmanship, like a great musical instrument or a knife, or pick whatever else you want. We go into people's houses and we talk about the moldings as being beautiful, or, landscaping, gardens, all of these sorts of organic things that we look at. We might think about beautiful animals as well. And notice the point that he's making here. All of these are beautiful in themselves. They're sufficient in themselves, whether we praise them or show contempt for them or just ignore them entirely. So, as many of the speakers have noted, beauty for the Stoics is something that's real. It's out there. It's available to us, even if we don't necessarily have the right kind of subjective responses to them. And that would be the praising or grasping it. And notice as well that there's an analogy that's being drawn here with justice, with truth, with kindness, or better put, goodwill, eunoia, and shame or humility, eidos, these moral qualities that we're looking for in people. So that's a great stage setter. And then Seneca adds something that I think is really good to remind ourselves of. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the end. In letter 76, he says that sometimes from an extremely beautiful object, one experiences great joy, even in a tiny space of time. So out of something that is really striking us, we have Gaudium Joy, which is one of the good emotions, right? For Stoics, this is a proper affective response to things. And notice that he says, even if just for a short time, tempore ac brevi in Latin. And I think that's a great reminder. We don't always have to be on when it comes to the perception of beauty. Sometimes it's enough just to have experienced it for a short period, and then we can remember it over time. So let's zoom out and think in terms of the biggest object we could possibly take in, the entire world, the entire universe. And this is not a uniquely Stoic thing by any means, right? It's other philosophers before the Stoics are looking up at the heavens or looking at the earth and saying, holy crap, is this beautiful? This is amazing. Let's take this in. And it's not just philosophers, it's people of all walks of life who are grasping this. And, we can look at the sky, we can look at the landscape, we can look at physical processes and find something there. And we can ask ourselves, okay, well, what makes the world or the universe beautiful? And, just pause for a moment and think about your own experiences of natural beauty. What did they encompass? Certainly there was an aspect of the senses, taking things in. We never see the whole universe. We never even see the entire landscape, right? In part because our eyes are right in the front of our head. I suppose a horse probably takes in a little bit more than we do because they're a prey creature rather than a predator creature like ourselves. But they don't take in everything either. So we're extending ourselves out into the universe through our minds, and we're imagining something. The force of impressions or appearances, phantasiae, is part of beauty for this. And what are the Stoics actually seeing? So I'm going to have a little play on words here. The Greek word for universe is Kosmos. That's also the Greek word for order and proportion and arrangement. So we can say that it's actually the cosmos of the cosmos that is being grasped both through our senses and our imagination and our rationality. And it's also that we're grasping something like a divine rationality at work. And this could raise some problems for modern Stoics who think that the universe doesn't contain any elements of that. And we can talk about that a bit later. Certainly for Seneca, certainly for Epictetus, certainly for Marcus Aurelius, that was part of it. So I've got two passages here from Seneca that I want to put before you, but we could easily bring up similar passages from Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. So if you've ever read Seneca's letter 65, which I highly advise that you do, he's talking about Plato and Aristotle and their notion of causes there, and he brings them together in a beautiful harmonization, and then says that they've gotten things wrong. And here's the Stoic point of view on it, typical Seneca there. He tells us that God made this wonderful universe, and he did so by using a model, a Platonic form, essentially, an exemplar. And he says the model according to which God, Deus, made such a vast and supremely beautiful piece of work, namely the entire universe. So for Seneca, the entire cosmos is something that is beautiful, and it's modeled after something even further, even deeper, an idea in the divine mind. In On Benefits, Seneca, and he says things like this in many places, clarifies even further, the gods gave us the second rank in this supremely beautiful home, and put us in charge of the earth. And this is a typical ancient Stoic point of view. Rational beings are in charge of things. We're sort of like God's deputies, so we better not screw it up, of course. And we get to apprehend this amazing, beautiful cosmos that we exist in, that we have a job in. So here we can start thinking about us human beings. And we have multiple and complex and interconnecting parts to play in relation to beauty. One of these is that we are creators and producers of beauty. We produce things that we consider to be beautiful when we work with materials that we consider precious, right? Setting the emerald in the gold necklace. Oh, that's nice, right? Maybe we make a beautiful gold statue of Seneca. We could do that as well, although, that should be pretty indifferent from a Stoic perspective. And we also produce beautiful items of usefulness or attractiveness, like lyres, not so much today, more guitars, pianos, things like that. Or, knives and other implements, your KitchenAid mixer, if it's well designed, could be an object of beauty, or through what we do with the physical world, engaging in gardening and landscape and arrangement. But we're also participants in the beauty of the entire cosmos that we noted earlier by being part of it, by taking up our parts as rational beings within it, as not mere animals, right? But as something that has a greater purpose. And by appreciating this universe as well. Another term for that is witnessing or understanding, right? Epictetus tells us that we human beings don't merely take in appearances and grasp them and respond to them. We understand them. And this is part of our relation to the divine ordering of the universe. Seneca in letter 115 says that if we could consider the mind of a great person, oh, what a beautiful sight we would see. We would see that beautiful sight, and by that he means virtue, even though it may be covered with dirt. Now, this is a recent translation. The Latin for that is quam vis sordido objectum. Now, sordido, grime, right? Kind of scum and things like that. So even though we don't see the virtue, untarnished, unblemished, we can still see it there. And now notice there's also an if there as well. Obviously, we can't open up somebody's head and peer inside and see the virtue shining in there. But we do see it through what people do, as we'll talk about in just a moment. Seneca in On Benefits also says something really quite remarkable. The power of the honorable, the honestum, the intrinsically valuable, to attract the minds of human beings is immense. Its beauty floods our minds and sweeps us along, enchanted with wonder at its brilliance and splendor. The most beautiful things are, in fact, often accompanied by a host of added attractions, but it is beauty that leads and the attractions follow along. So, there's many different beautiful things. And when it comes to people that we find attractive, we can find their bodies attractive. We can find their sense of humor great, or all sorts of other things like that. But it's really, we talk about inner beauty, which shows itself externally, that we can be amazed by and dazzled by and attracted to, or even sometimes, Seneca doesn't talk about this here, pained by, when we find that we ourselves don't measure up to those who we emulate. On Shortness of Life, another thing that Seneca says is really quite cool. We're led by the work of others into the presence of the most beautiful treasures, which have been pulled from darkness and brought to light. Now, what are these most beautiful treasures? They are the words, the thought, the lives being offered to us of people long gone, the possibility of a relationship with ancient thinkers who can actually give us, as Seneca will say, more life, and a beautiful life on that way. So notice that beauty, understood in this sense, in other human beings, has the capacity to motivate us. It can jar, it can rearrange, it can fit into our motivational structures. It can give us pleasure, it can give us joy, it can provoke desire. And not all desire is going to be bad in relation to beauty. We should desire some of the types of beauty that are out there. It can lead to emulation. Now, when we think about ourselves, because we're human beings as well, we don't know ourselves perfectly. We're all a little bit of a mystery to ourselves, so long as we're not the sage. And, if anybody is, go ahead and chime in and let us know, because it'd be kind of cool to meet a sage, but I'm not going to hold out too much hope for that here. We do have a different kind of access to ourselves than we do to other people, right? We can't peer inside our own heads, but we know what's going on in there a lot of the time. And so we can say, well, what makes us genuinely beautiful, as opposed to the things that are beautiful in our bodies or in our possessions? And we might want to recall Enchiridion 6. There's a really funny passage there. Epictetus is going to say, if a horse wanted to get worked up, literally elated, epairomenos in Greek, because it realized that it's beautiful, which I suppose could happen. It doesn't happen all that often. But if a horse was going to preen around and act as if it's really a big deal, that's fine, right? That's a horse thing. But for you to be elated because you own a beautiful horse, that's just ridiculous. The horse isn't you. That beauty doesn't belong to you at all, even if you have a title to it. And so he says, what is us there? And here he says one thing that sometimes I think gets people a bit confused when they only focus in on passages like that. Use of appearances, the chresis fantasion. That's not all that is up to us. That's not everything that we do, but that's a really important thing. And this actually addresses a lot of the questions that people are asking about the use of the indifference or our relation to them. Many of them are indifferent, right? And that is up to us. And that is part of how we become beautiful. In Discourses 3:1, Epictetus is going to give us a lot, more, let's say, focused teaching about this. And he's talking about the context of what makes a person beautiful. And he begins by talking about dogs and horses, right? What makes those animals beautiful? And he says, it will be correct to pronounce each of them beautiful so far as it is developed suitably to its own nature. And we can talk about this in terms of many of the things that people have brought up: proportion, function, all of those sorts of things. Just as a digression, there's a beautiful 2-year-old cat that I was hanging out with yesterday at a cat shelter. And she's beautiful in a sense because she is just a brute. She's super strong, super fast, very dominant when it comes to other cats, loves to play, right? Well, that's the way a cat ought to be at that age, right? And we could go on and talk about all sorts of other kinds of animals as well. Now, what about us? We're not dogs or cats or horses or any of those sorts of things. So he's talking to a guy who comes into his school and he's a little bit too dressed up, a little bit too put together. And he says, if you make yourself such a quality, you will make yourself beautiful. But if you neglect those things, even though you use every contrivance to appear beautiful, you must necessarily be deformed. For you, what are you? You are not flesh and hair, but your faculty of choice, your proeresis. And if you take care to have this become beautiful, well, then you're beautiful, because that's what you truly are. And so if we want to be beautiful, we have to think about our rational and social nature, about the virtues, about our character, about the use of appearances and indifference, and about our relationships and roles, our connections to other people. And notice, going back to another theme that came up at the very beginning of this conference, these things are up to us. These are within the scope of our, whatever you want to call it, control, power, business, the epumon, right? Hemon, rather. So notice that there's interconnections here. We haven't just started with the cosmos, and then we got cosmic beauty, and then the beauty of other people, and then our own beauty. These are all interconnected with each other, right? We take part in society, we take part in a cosmos as rational beings. And that means developing the virtues. That means making beautiful choices. That means sometimes also finding the spots of ugliness within ourselves and looking at those and figuring out how we're going to address those. And now we get to things that might be a little bit ugly or have the potential for that. Marcus Aurelius in Meditations 3.2, a passage that we've already talked about a little bit, we should remember that even nature's inadvertence has its own charm, its own attractiveness. The way that loaves of bread split open on top in the oven, the ridges are just byproducts of the baking and yet pleasing somehow. They rouse our appetite without our knowing why. Or how ripe figs begin to burst and olives on the point of falling. The shadow of decay gives them a peculiar beauty. Stalks of wheat bending under their own weight, the furrowed brow of the lion, flecks of foam on the boar's mouth, and other things. If you look at them in isolation, there's nothing beautiful about them. And yet, by supplementing nature, they enrich it and draw us in. And anyone with a feeling for nature, a deeper sensitivity, will find it all gives pleasure, even what seems inadvertent. He'll find the jaws of live animals as beautiful as painted ones or sculpture. He'll look calmly at the distinct beauty of old age in men, women, and at the loveliness of children. And other things like that will call out to him constantly, things unnoticed by others, things seen only by those at home with nature and its works. So notice what he's talking about here. There's this availability of beauty everywhere. We have to make ourselves capable of grasping it. We have to have not just a deeper understanding, but a deeper, the word there is enoion, a common concept that we can tap into as human beings. A feeling, a pathos we need as well. And notice there's, nothing in these things that is going to make us that way. It's up to us and how we look at it. So there's a passage I want to bring up just to tie all of this together, and then we'll jump into some good discussion, hopefully. Epictetus, as you know, wants us to be purple threads. He says, I want to be the purple, that small and brilliant portion which causes the rest to appear comely and beautiful. What good does the purple do to the garment? But to be beautiful in itself and to set a good example to the rest. Now, you could interpret this as, well, there's purple threads and that's great. And then there's the white garment and that's all crap. Don't be a white garment person. But no, it's a cohesive whole. It's not a contrast here of good versus bad or wise versus stupid or anything like that. He is saying, you can be the purple thread and then you provide a good example and you beautify the rest. And I want to say, although Epictetus doesn't say this, maybe we can think of the purple thread person as also one who provides us with an example for how to genuinely appreciate the beauty that's out there waiting for us to grasp it and respond to it in our lives. And so, do we have guidelines for this? There have been a lot of that have been given, I think, that are very helpful here. And so I'm just going to say 3 quick things, and then maybe others will have some guidelines they want to bring up. We do need to direct ourselves towards the right kinds of beauty and to be open to recognizing them. The beauty of the cosmos, the beauty in other people that is not just of their faces or clothing or bodies or things like that. And we also have to avoid certain mindsets that I think are quite prevalent in our own time that want to control or to consume or to commodify beauty. And then the other thing that we have to do is extricate ourselves from excessive and irrational responses to what we take as beautiful. And Epictetus gives us an example of this in the Enchiridion when he says, you see a beautiful body, you've got temperance to help you deal with that, right? You have the capacity to do all of these sorts of things. So that is all that I have for you. I think I've taken up a little bit more time than I was supposed to. So hopefully we'll have some good Q&A and we can maybe derive some new guidelines as well.
Oh, that was so wonderful. Okay, can we do the clap in the comments thing, which is so cool? And you do have some questions. That was wonderful. So I'm just going to start with the most recent. Is there anything imaginary that is beautiful to classic Stoics?
Oh,
Imaginary.
yeah. I mean, so imaginary as in not really existing, I suppose you would say, right? So, yeah, we could talk about narrative figures in fiction, like in drama, right? And it's kind of funny because in a lot of cases, Epictetus will say, the Iliad's just a bunch of connected appearances. We look at these plays, but I mean, Seneca wrote plays, so presumably thought there was some value there. And I think, we could look at fictional characters and at things that they're going through and say, aha, there's some beauty there, perhaps beauty in terms of virtue or other things as well. Like we could say the relationship between people of, say, love could be beautiful, right? You think of Perseus's poem where he has, and I'm not counseling this as a great example for all of us, but Cato and his wife, they've been separated from each other, but they still love each other. Well, there's a kind of beauty there, right? But Cato was a real person, but Perseus's Cato is not real Cato. It's an imagination. So maybe that would be.
A great question, a great answer. Now the problem is we have these amazing questions lining up. Do you think that the beauty of virtue is one of the core arguments for why virtue is the only good?
Oh, that is actually a great question. And I won't be able to explore that fully, but I mean, you do see in a lot of Stoic texts, think about Marcus's reminder to himself in the morning, right? The people who are screwed up don't realize that the good is the beautiful. And so there's this great overlap, the genuinely beautiful. And there is a beauty to virtue, and it's got multiple affective elements to it. This is where, I think it's Seneca's letter 120, when he's talking about where did we get our ideas of the virtues from, can be quite helpful. And he says it's according to analogy. And what he means by analogy there is something like grasping a rudimentary thing. So we see somebody, this isn't what we see all the time, but there's this guy defending the bridge against the enemy, and he's displaying this remarkable courage, and we're like, holy crap, look at that guy, and we respond to it and we grasp the virtues in that way. And I think, we do have definitions of virtue, but we really do need instances and examples that you and I can relate to as human beings, right? So that might play into that.
Well, this is really hard because there are a lot of good questions up here, and I think we have time for one, but one is related to what you just described. Is there, I think you said something like our virtue does sometimes come out in our physical. Did you say something like that?
Oh, well, no, I mean, we do virtue through our bodies, we could say, right? And we can tell whether somebody is virtuous sometimes by what they say, but obviously if they just tell you, well, I'm courageous, that doesn't make them courageous, right? We see it in their actions and the patterns of those actions, and then the words that go along with them. And there has to be, kind of a consonance between those, a consistency. And that's how we actually witness virtue. We can't ever look inside with some sort of X-ray for moral purposes and find the virtue lurking in the heart or the head or whatever it happens to be. We have to go by outward appearances. And I mean, I don't even know if we can look inside ourselves with the inner eye or whatever metaphor we want to use and see the virtue shining within us. I think we have to see it in what we do over and over and over again. And that's manifest in this physical world that we exist in.
Yeah. So it might not be physical beauty in a conventional sense. That was but maybe a Stoic will see things other than physical beauty, even if they're observing the same behavior as a non-Stoic.
And before we totally run out of time, how you use whatever measure of physical beauty you have could be how you demonstrate virtue, right? Are you full of yourself and expect people to fall all over themselves doing nice things for you if you happen to be attractive for a little while? Well, that would be unvirtuous, right? Being attractive and yet behaving like a decent human being, well, that would be at least on the way to virtue.
So great.
Thank you, Greg and Jennifer. That was just amazing. Thank you both. Big round of applause again in the chat. Flood that chat with your applause emojis.